Welcome back to Bar and Barrel. This is your one-stop shop for all DM tips. This is our third video of our seven-part series on Know Your Players as a DM. If you haven't been following the previous videos, what we're doing is we're going through the Dungeon Master's Guide on page 6. They have 7 different points on knowing your players so that you can better tailor your games and improve your campaigns for your players and to engage them a little better. And so we've been taking each one and we've been going into it in a little more depth. The topic we are jumping into today is instigating. Riley, do you want to kick us off?
Yes, players who like to instigate action are eager to make things happen, even if that means taking perilous risks. They would rather rush headlong into danger and face the consequences than face boredom.
Yeah, so these instigators, you're going to know exactly who they are. These are the players that drive your game forward. These are the ones who are anxious to jump on any quest you have. These players might be the ones with a little bit of an ego, right? They know they're the main character. And so these players are wonderful additions to have in your campaign. They're willing to just jump into things. They're just hungry for any sort of challenge or adventure, anything like that you can offer them. Okay, so if you have identified your instigators in your group, the DMG just right here below it is going to offer us a couple different points on how we can keep these players engaged, right? Engage players who like to instigate by allowing them to affect their surroundings. An example of this, I had a campaign, this was years ago, had my players, they were trying to basically eradicate a bunch of frog people. I can't remember exactly what the monster was, but they were stuck inside these caves and they needed to get rid of them. And one of my players ended up enlarging a ferret, and it became this giant ferret. He rolled very well to enlarge it. We were playing 3.5 at the time. And so this giant ferret goes up and it just starts destroying all these people that they needed to get rid of. They complete the quest, right? They go back to town. Everything's good to go. The ferret runs off and they go cash in for their bounty. Everything's good to go until a couple sessions later, they move on to the next town. Come to find that the next town has been completely devastated by a giant ferret that has gone through the town. It's massacred kids, set buildings, like just destroyed through buildings. People are completely traumatized by this. And they realized, oh crap, our actions have consequences, right? But it was a memorable event, and they're never gonna forget how much devastation they created just by casting a single spell. So your players' decisions should always matter.
As DMs, if you haven't noticed, a lot of times you'll drop hints to players that you didn't really that aren't really hints to the campaign. They're just little sidebars, little bits of description, and they take it as like a super hint. Flip that on its head. Everything that they do and everything that they say, consider that in how that would affect your world. Take that to heart and apply it to your world and make it so that the surroundings are changed due to the player's actions, because they are shaping your world effectively. And so I think this plays back a lot if you haven't gone and watched our other video on exploring in this series. I think this point hits on that whole section really well, as interacting with your surroundings is very, very important, both combat, social encounters, in just normal exploration. Knowing your surroundings and what's there to be used can help you out a lot. And as a DM, I feel like we really should be fleshing out our campaigns. This doesn't take, I don't feel, a whole lot of prep on your part. This is a lot of times in the moment, just what comes to mind. If they're in an arena, quickly describe. Is it a dry, dusty arena with a couple sandstone pillars? Or is this a swamp that's very thick with dew and heavy of air? And for the surroundings, there's probably water, there's plant life, there's this, that, the other. The players can then kind of decipher what is available to them to be used. And this allows them to hopefully be a little bit more creative in their surroundings and the way that they interact with your world. It also allows you to see what intrigues them and if they thoroughly enjoy working, with their surroundings. What if they're in the bar? Are there some empty bottles that they can use as an improvised weapons to smash over some guy's head, or a bar stool that they can break and make a club out of one of the legs, whatever works for them, Make sure that those options are there so that when it comes time for them to make those decisions, they have something to grasp onto.
I think every player has a little bit of an instigator in them. Your players just need enough options to play off of. And so I think that if you give enough options within the bounds of your quest, that your players will be a little more creative and they'll be able to choose all those different options. That's our first one. We'll jump right into this next one then. So, including things in your adventures to tempt them. This is an awesome one. Riley, you want to take us?
Yeah, so going back to our previous point here, this is obviously the point of you pointing out things in the environment that have maybe a little bit more eye-catching. There's a barrel in the corner you notice that seems like it's been there a while, and it looks like whatever liquid was inside is slowly stoked through the barrel and is slightly leaking out, and it looks like it's got a slight sheen, like an oily sheen to it. In my eyes as a player, it's like, oh, that's probably a barrel of oil or something. If I hit that thing with fire, I could effectively have, a nice fireball in that corner, or surprise on whatever, or use it as a bomb to blow the wall open, things of that nature.
As a DM, there's so many different ways you can tempt your players. And this is where, as a DM, your inner marketer kind of comes out, right? You can play on your players' logos, ethos, and pathos. So, you might offer your players this huge reward, lots of money. Maybe it's a special weapon or something like that if they complete a quest. Maybe you have a woman who lost her child, and turns out the child was abducted by a band of raiders, and she doesn't have anything to give you, but you play on the heartstrings of the players. You're able to tempt your players in different ways, and your instigators, this is what engages them, is that they can take pride in the fact that, whether it be by moral obligation or by greed or whatever it might be, as they're playing through their players, they are happy and quick to jump right into those quests because they're eager to make things right or get rich, or whatever their motivations may be. They're eager to start that quest, and it only takes one person to get that ball rolling for the rest of the group. Most of the other players will follow, and they play and they feed off of that energy too.
Yeah, and I think this plays in very well into the next point here. Letting their actions put their characters in a tight spot. I believe in one of my past campaigns here, somewhat recently, there was a group of cultists. The leaders of the town ended up being a part of that. The players found out about that, and they followed them to their secret meeting. In fact, they ended up somehow getting one of the other players in on that meeting as a part of the group. And as the town leadership was leaving, the players kind of panicked. They weren't sure what to do, whether they should kind of let him go or what to do with these town leaders, because they had them all together. They ended up fireballing the group. They ended up totally just destroying the leadership of this entire town, because they were aligned with this cultist group that they were trying to take down, and took all their stuff, just kind of left them and ran away from the town. A little while later in the campaign, they came back to this town, and the whole town was just shut down, just closed under investigation. And the guards ended up recognizing them and, stating that they were here at the time that, the people, went missing or died. And they ended up having to kind of talk their way out of it, being like, "No, we're not the people you were looking for," Jedi mind tricks and all that. And the consequences of their actions, kind of came back to them. I didn't honestly think that they were going to come back to this town, but they did, and I remembered that they had totally destroyed the leadership of this town, and so though nobody saw them do it, they still had the issue of having to now talk their way out of not being caught up in this investigation and being prime suspects for this investigation. And so allow your players, even if they do things, homicidal like that, allow the consequences to take effect, whether good or bad. Let them get themselves into tight spots, because that's where a lot of times the players that becomes some of their more interesting and exciting moments. There was also a point in Christian's campaign where we were playing where we had to complete a riddle, but as we started the riddle, we were essentially started to get surrounded by these little like eder caps or something like that. And the longer it took us to do this puzzle, the more and more enemies that kept going. And once we completed the puzzle, they all stopped coming. But we didn't know that at the time, and so half of us were like, "Oh, you know what? We'll just sit here and fend off all of the enemies." Little did we know that the enemies weren't going to stop coming until we finished the puzzle, and so we almost ended up dying because we focused more on the combat than completing the puzzle. And so we almost, as a player group, we had to live with our consequences and almost lost a couple players, including myself, in that encounter because we decided to do one thing rather than the other. And so allow them to get themselves in tight spots and watch them find a way out.
I have a couple quick examples too. In one of my earlier campaigns that we had the group was escaping with an ancient artifact that they had gotten from deep inside this mine. And as they were running across, the bridge that they were going with was crumbling behind them, right? And so they were making these dexterity checks and athletics checks in order to not fall down into the abyss, essentially. They had an NPC with them who I ended up having fail and began to slip and fall and was about to be completely dropped into the abyss and called out to one of the players for help. And the player was faced with a tough moral decision to have to turn around and go back and save this person who's about to fall. And so he paused for a minute, decided to do it, flipped around, ran back, and then he was forced to make a series of checks in order to get to the person, to the NPC, save them, and then get back to where they were, and narrowly made it back to where they needed to be. But it was in a very tight spot, and everybody's blood pressure was a little high. We'll just put it that way, right? And so created an opportunity for them to be placed in a tight spot, creates a lot of that drama, and allows for your players to really just engage in that action, right? But the key to it is knowing your players, knowing how to, like I said, the marketer inside of you, how you can pull those strings for those players and get them to fall into your traps.
Yeah, moral of the story, allow your players to affect your world. Allow them to put themselves in tight spots and allow the outcomes to land where they may. And let your players find a way to get themselves out of that situation, because it creates great moments. And obviously we're remembering these things because these were pivotal moments in our campaigns. And, there's only usually a few parts to every campaign that everyone in the group remembers. And a lot of them are usually based on tight spots that the DM allows you to be in and you miraculously got yourselves out of. Let's move on to our next point here, and our final point of this instigating, including encounters with NPCs who are as feisty and unpredictable as they are. Let's say you have a barbarian in your group, and they like to play, the hack 'em all, slash 'em all, strongest man. I am the Hulk, and they know that they are the strongest person, and there's no one else that can compete with them when it comes to arm wrestling. They always want to arm wrestle people in taverns because they know they can win. And you put up someone else that, is just as strong, if not stronger than they are, and they lose, or, they feel intimidated by this, and it puts a fire under their butt. It gets them in this point of like, wait, no, I'm the strong guy. Like, who are you to think you're stronger than me? And it gets them in this almost aggravated state as a player of like, no, I'm the hero. I'm the big strong guy in this group. No one else is going to beat me in that, and I'm going to prove it to you. It can allow as well for really fun role playing for your characters. It also can allow some extra encounters or situations that you didn't plan for as a DM. And these are sometimes moments that you kind of set before your players and you watch them just unfold and just interact with each other. And you could just kind of sit back and watch them, interact with this moment that you've created just because of the ego of one of the players.
I think that this entire point revolves around the saying, "This town ain't big enough for the two of us," because I think as a DM, one of my favorite ways to engage some of my players is creating a character that is exactly who they're playing, maybe a level or two above or below them, and then engaging them with that player, whether it be in combat or different feats of strength, as you mentioned, Riley, or whatever it may be. But there's nothing better than to watch a 1v1 unravel where your player is just bound and determined to be the best version of himself, right? This town ain't big enough for the two of us. There can only be one of us. There can only be one Highlander, if you will. And those are just memorable moments in any campaign.
Yeah, I'm glad you bring that up, Christian. We mentioned back in our acting video, the first of this series, of a player that we had that you brought in some character, I believe it was from his backstory, that he ended up doing a 1v1 against, kind of like my champion versus your champion sort of situation. And we all kind of hyped him up, and, he went into this fight, with a little bit of rage behind him because he had made this backstory against this character, and this was kind of his rival, and he ended up beating the guy, and he had a cool storytelling or acting moment where he ended up sparing the guy's life. Even though he, as a barbarian, had some rage and really just wanted to just lop the dude's head off out of anger. You bring up a good point, and this is my point of, I believe instigating, now that you say this, is a great gateway to a lot of these other points. This opens up opportunities not only for combat, but for them to act, to bring out portions of their backstory, to allow them to tell the story and introduce portions of their backstory to the rest of the party, to the world, and act upon those things, explore different options, and kind of problem solve their way through this scenario that you've put in front of them, and they get to give their own very creative solution to this problem. And so I do believe that this is probably one of the better ways to start your players if they are only an instigator or they're specific to a certain role, if they're just all about fighting and not acting. Forcing them into this kind of instigating role would allow them to open doors to more storytelling or acting or problem-solving scenarios that they otherwise don't put themselves in as players.
So there you have it. Those are your instigators. Focus on those 4 points on engaging them, right? Allow their decisions to affect their environment. Put them in tight spots. Put people up against them that, are just as crazy as they are. Tempt them with everything. It's going to engage those players, and it's going to be easier for you as a DM to keep the ball rolling. That's our 2 cents on instigation, and knowing your players as instigators. So catch us next time on Bard and Barrel. We'll be taking on fighting.